of our journey to bouncing back. Nothing is going to be perfect. The measures that have been taken across the board with distinct efforts to begin that process of getting us back onto the road of recovery and also for growth. We didn't get here overnight, and we're certainly not going to reach that destination overnight. But what I have seen, Mr. President, is encouraging, because I have seen ministers putting their hands to the plow to ensure that across a number of sectors there are policies that are going to bring at least some sort of equilibrium to how we share this burden and to who benefits. The benefit, as I see it, is for all of us. There are some things that some people may believe can be done better. There are some sections of the society that believe that maybe they might be overlooked, as I saw in the newspaper recently. But the reality is that even in your own homes, in managing your own affairs, you cannot please everyone, but you have to do what is in the best interest of the majority of people. I am not going to spend any amount of time trying to repeat a lot of what has already been said, because one of the things that I am very clear of in my mind is that the Barbadian public has shown time and time and time again a knack for critical thinking, a knack for making wise decisions, and a knack for speaking out on issues that are relevant to them and matter. But there are a couple of things within this budget that I want to try my very best to start to connect to people, to members here and persons on the outside. Because oftentimes we see these things in a vacuum, or we see them as being very separate. But I think when you take a look at, for instance, I want to look at the Immigration Citizens Act that is coming from the Ministry of Home Affairs. We have heard time and time again that in small developing territories like ours, small populations prove to be a major problem. If you're seeking manufacturing, for instance, let's take a simple look. I've heard people continue to say that we need to diversify. I've heard people talk about manufacturing. The reality is if you have a small population, then your capacity to start off with is small. And if you're going to compete with the giants, let's look at the territories: China, India, Pakistan. For us to compete with those nations in terms of manufacturing, it is impossible. So what are we going to do? Find niche markets, create high-end products, unique products? What is it that we are intending to do? These are the questions and these are the things that we have to answer first before we begin this continuous talk about diversification and such things like that matter. Because if you're going to be competing on the global market, then the ability to have competitive prices comes into play. To supply the demand adequately comes into play. We just don't have the capacity at this particular point in time. Will we ever be able to do it? I don't know. But what I do know is that we have the capacity to export skills, to export ideas, and to partner with different persons across the globe in order to create businesses that could funnel capital back to Barbados. But I say all of that just to make this point, that when we are debating these types of things, we have to always try to put everything in context. Because we have access to the internet and we can see things happening in other parts of the world, I listen very carefully. And oftentimes, we seem to be comparing ourselves to other territories that are way ahead of us in simple areas, science, technology, creation of medicines, these type of things. And we want to say, well, why is this not happening in Barbados, or that we can do this and we can do the next and we can do the third? We're limited in the things that we can do. What we can do is to manage what we have in a complete different way. And so I started to talk about the whole idea of the immigration. What I'm impressed most of all in this is that we speak about finding skilled persons, skills that we presently do not have, and opening up a door to have those skills come into Barbados. This, in my mind, can only benefit us. Again, if you look at some of the things that are happening in the world, technology, you look around and you see the Elon Musks of this world and other persons like that who are becoming multi-billionaires out of these particular things. Our people have the same capacity to do these things, but have to be exposed to it in order for us to reap the benefits that can accrue from such businesses. We don't have the skills here presently, but nothing stops us from going out into our diaspora and looking for these skills. And as stated there, this should be, in my mind, our first targets to bring these types of skills in. Having been born in England myself, I continue to make the point that for many years, Barbados has missed out on the opportunities to connect with its diaspora and to be able to find those skills that are unavailable, or I shouldn't even say not just unavailable, but in some not adequate enough within our own setting to help us to build out, to becoming a major player in this world that we live in today. And so I am heartened that that particular aspect is one that, although the legislation has not been passed through these chambers as yet, but that we're thinking in that way because it gives us the opportunity to tap into these things. And I know that sometimes Barbadians can be, not just Barbadians, people all over the world, can sometimes have reservations when you start talking immigration and opening your doors to others. But from my own experience, Mr. President, I can tell you, I worked on a cruise ship with 38 different nationalities. I look at it as one of the most important parts of my life in terms of me being able to grow as a human being. You learn so much things, some good, some bad. But in that learning process, you grow. And I am confident in my mind that if we get this done right, that the growth that we are talking about is not only just going to be economic growth, it'll be cultural. There's so many things that can happen for us. So I want to zero in on that in particular. I also want to take the time to go back and talk a little bit about some of the things that the Honorable Prime Minister spoke about in terms of culture. One of the things that we have not done well, and I guess it's probably because of, again, lack of appreciation for these things, but we've not been able to use our creative and cultural people to most efficient way in order for them to be contributing to the economy. I'll tell you why I say that. We have on this island a, I guess you would say, a fledgling film industry. But we also have a beautiful island that is also a location, second to none. Anywhere in the world, second to none. We've had some gains probably over the last 15, maybe 20 years in terms of exploiting that particular aspect of it. But the Prime Minister, in her wisdom, has sought to move to the next level in terms of looking at the creation of studios, sound stages, these types of things, engagements with people from the biggest film things, Bollywood, Hollywood, Nollywood, and probably you soon get your own Barbados Wood, whatever you choose to call it. But the point is, as our young people in particular begin to expand into different areas, the traditional things that we ask them to do. Senator Rogers, you would know when you are at school, our things were limited. Our young people don't have those limitations today. And we must be able to respond in a way that going to work for them is not a chore, but a passion. When people are passionate about things, you will get the results. You will get the results from it. They will work hard. They will try to educate and re-educate themselves as the technology and all the other things change. So you have this thing that we're sitting on for a number of years that we're beginning now, as I said in the beginning, to make the first steps in being able to bring this into the mainstream so that people can benefit from it. I also want to look at the development of Queen's Park. At the first look, one might say to yourself, well, what is that going to do? But I dare say that it is a huge capital works project, which in itself will create jobs for the building out of it. And once it is done, with all the things that are supposed to go in there, dance studios, recording studios, residence for artists and stuff like that, what you're doing is you're beginning to build out even further the capacity of the cultural industries and creative industries to earn. Now, if we don't do these things now, what is going to happen is that we'll be talking about doing it in years to come. But we've been having these conversations, at least I have, since the late 80s, early 90s. So for me, it is not just important that the general public begins to understand how these things can affect us in a positive way, not only just in terms of bringing in revenue and stuff like that, but there's health and wellness considerations that you should take into consideration. For instance, in a global pandemic, people were locked up in their homes. People dealt with mental health issues. Sadly, even here in Barbados, you had an unusual spike in suicides, not only on island, but on ships, in our waters. The arts and these types of endeavors are what we call pressure relievers. To release that pressure. It takes people's minds for a good book, a good film, good music, dance. These things have value, which we have to begin to realize at this particular point in time. Because, as has been mentioned, as the world becomes increasingly more and more insular, we have got to be able to invest in those things that are going to keep our people safe. We spoke a lot about food security. We speak a lot about health. But I've always been and will always be an advocate of mental health. Because if you do not have a mentally well society, all the other things that we talk about, people being able to invest, people being able to go to work and produce, it's not going to happen. And so the mental state of your people, for me, is paramount. And that is why I try to link the whole idea of the new experience of having different persons bringing different skills, different cultures, different approaches to doing things into our island, to blend with what we already know. You're never too old to learn. And so that learning process, even though it's a two-way street, it can only build a better society. Having the arts playing an integral role in that gives us the opportunity to take those same things that we develop to the rest of the world. The rest of the world is always looking for new things. And coming out of a pandemic, there are people, as you can see from the flock of people that we have down here for cricket, people want to get out and enjoy something new. So the arts and sport, all of these things linked to tourism, gives you the capacity to earn again in a different way. The development of proper sports persons, not just athletes, but sports medicine, sports psychology, all of these things that we've not paid a lot of attention to. I've seen the various ministers responsible for these areas begin to speak to these things. And it gives me a sense of hope that we are beginning to understand that the traditional things that we've done for years are not the only things that we have to be concerned and worried about. I always tell people, when I was a young boy, I remember they used to have a saying, sugar was king. I lived to see in Europe in particular, they started to tell you that sugar had problems and that they were going to begin to beat sugar and that it would have been better than what we were producing. And one thing that I've noticed, that same type of mentality still pervades today. Whereas when you talk about small islands like ours trying to do things to develop themselves, none of us in here are oblivious to the problems that we have been having with the European Union and economic standards and practices. And it seems as if every time you start to make a move, the rules change. And we're always going to be playing catch up because that is just the way of the world. We cannot fool ourselves into believing that we are among the high and mighty, because we are not. Even in terms of how people designate it. You know, I've often asked, how does one arrive at us being a third world country or somebody else? Or as one former president made a comment about our type of societies, how does one even survive in today's environment when you have all of these pressures coming at you? So I am acutely aware of the things that we can do, but I'm also aware of the things that we face, not of our own making, but because of who we are. And I say all of that just to get Barbadians to understand that we're not on our own. And so that a lot of the measures or a lot of the things that people believe should happen or could happen or they want to happen are not just dependent on the few people who sit in Parliament. There are lots of other factors that we have to fight against as we do these budgets, as we make decisions for future generations. I really wanted to make that particular point because I know within the society of listening to people talking about the budgets and one of the things that came across is that the business sector appears to be pretty comfortable with what has been proposed so far. These are the experts in financing and money management and investing and all of these things. So that if they are comfortable, one can say, well, they are at the top of the chain, but what about the people at the bottom? Well, I've always said, and I will always say from my experience working in another place, in another life, that we all, regardless of if you're well off, whether if you're middle income, or whether you're below the poverty line, there is one thing that all of us have in common, and that is the power of choice. And I remember in 1983, a fellow who is well known to me walked onto a stage and sang a song called Tighten Your Belt. I said earlier, this is a time to tighten your belts. We are by no stretch of the imagination, as I said earlier, out of the woods. But we have to be responsible in how we conduct our private and public affairs. It is incumbent that we don't just look at it in terms of the taxes and those sorts of things, because even though money is important and it can do a lot of things, we've also got to be, and I think I heard it here today, but I just want to reiterate it, we also still have to be our brother's keepers. And for those of us who can lend that helping hand during this time to someone else, I take this opportunity, even though it might seem a little different for a debate like this, to make that plea to our own people. I came to this country in 1970. I always talk about it. The first time ever in my life that I would have experienced caring of a community in such a way. You know it well. Small village in St. Philip. You know that the exchange of things, everybody had their own little kitchen garden. There wasn't a lot of money around. Everybody had their own little kitchen garden. Some people raised chickens, some people had cows, some people had sheep, few people had goats. But people were industrious. People were entrepreneurial at that particular time. Inside this budget, they talk about getting entrepreneurial activity going, which means you're going back to what I consider to be the root of who we are as a people. And so these measures that I see, as I said before, coming across a wide range of ministries are geared towards getting people to be as, word I'm looking for, self-sufficient as humanly possible under the circumstances. And I believe that as we make these steps, it's a gradient. Small steps, small steps, small steps. The move from fossil fuels to renewable energy is going to be huge as long as we can implement properly, as long as we can convince more people to get involved. Because as was mentioned earlier, the unfortunate thing about oil is that for countries like us who don't produce any, slightest thing that happens and the prices go up. And as soon as the prices go up, we're at the mercy of those persons producing the oil. But yet, we have and have had for many, 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 many years beautiful sunshine, wind, even water, and we're now beginning to see again the value of these things given to us, not by any drilling or anything, but naturally there for us to use. And I'm very, very hopeful that once those programs get going, that you will begin to feel at ease within the society in terms of your energy costs and things like that. So these are the things that I believe we need as a country to really begin to push seriously and to implement as quickly as possible so that you can have that buffer. Because I do not believe, in my mind, looking around the world and at what is happening, that if things get any worse, and people are going to begin, and I dare say they've already begun to do it, to close their doors. So who has oil? They're going to hold on to the oil. Who has wheat? They're going to hold on to the wheat. And who has whatever else that we need for food, energy, medicine, whatever it is, people are going to begin to close doors. We saw it in the pandemic with the vaccines, and there's nothing that suggests that the world will not continue to be in that way once there's a shortage or panic or anything else going on. So we have to begin to use and to rally around each other and to use the things that we have, the knowledge, the resources, both human and otherwise, to take and secure ourselves. I believe also that as we go through this particular process, I think I've mentioned it before, you're not going to be able to please everyone, but everyone has a role to play in us reaching the destination where we are. And I believe that sometimes we have to look past all of the other things that drive us, be there considerations of politics, be it just pure selfishness, whatever it is, and look at the wider and the bigger picture. And that bigger picture is the survival of this land that all of us say that we love. And it is important, extremely important, that we give the support to the various ministries in implementing these projects. Mr. President, I believe also that a time has come where we also have to look in the mirror and ask ourselves as a people, are we actually doing the best that we can do for ourselves? In a number of ways. You know, I listen very carefully to to people say things about the various ministries and the other things. In particular, for the last probably 18 months, the radios has been bombarded with things about, you know, welfare and all of these different places. But I go back to my original point that I made. If we were a bit more caring type of society, a lot of the pressure that is placed upon those particular institutions that will cause them to be almost overwhelmed could be relieved in a complete different way. And I believe we have the capacity to do it. I've seen Barbadians step up to the plate on a number of occasions when called upon. And I believe that going forward, they're going to be called upon again. There was a certain amount of skepticism when you went around, where people were looking to see, well, things are going to get really, really hard, they're going to be high taxation, and you don't know. And there was a certain amount of fear. Then there was some people who were stoking that fire, but for their own political reasons or whatever else. But at the end of the day, I continue to make the point, and I probably sound like a record that is stuck, but I believe it is something that we need to take into consideration. When we make claims that are rooted in trying to create fear, trying to create discord, trying to score points in some instances, you have to be cognizant of the damage that one can do if the things that you are saying are proven to be untrue. According to the language that people use around the world today, if it happens to be fake news, you have to be cognizant of the damage that you can do. And in a small society like this, with a fragile economy, there's not a lot of room for any type of mistake, so to speak. Because even in good times, in these kinds of societies, slightest sneeze and you're in problems. Because like I said, we are not the great producers of anything that the rest of the world wants or needs. And it's only us that we have to depend on. So I want to just say that I believe, strongly believe, that we are on the right path. Is everything perfect? Absolutely not. But am I confident that we will do our very best to ensure that Barbadians ride through this tough time? Yes, I am. I'm confident that Barbadians themselves will rise to the occasion and help where necessary. Yes, I am. Am I confident that the mandate given to the Barbados Labour Party will be executed in such a way that for generations to come, it will reverberate as being probably one of those stellar moments of government. And when I say government, I mean government in its broadest term, not any particular political party, but government. Yes, I do. Do I feel that every single member within here feels the same way? And the reason why we're here? Yes, I do. But as I said, we may not always agree on all points, but that's not important. What is important is that when support is needed, that we give that support. And I give my support to these measures. And with those very few words, I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator King. Senator Paris. Senator Paris.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise to support the appropriation bill before this honorable chamber this afternoon. In doing so, I would like to use the opportunity to thank Barbadians for once again giving this government the opportunity to finish the work that it started in May 2018. And also, in giving the government the opportunity, I am indeed honored to be given the opportunity to support this government and by extension, put my hand to the plow for the people of this country for a second time in this honorable chamber. On coming to office in 2018, this government sat down with its creditors and tried to work out ways to ease the burden for Barbadians. Mr. President, in sitting down, it allowed the government to find creative ways, in easing the burden, like I said. And the government was able to do several things. We were able to increase the non-contributory pension from $155 per fortnight to $225. We were able to increase the funeral grants by $500. And as a result of the pandemic, several persons were unemployed. Hence, we were able to do the mitigation unit, which gave families who did not have any source of income an opportunity to get $600 a month, a stipend of $600 that assisted them greatly in putting food on the tables for their families. From the start of the Adopt a Family program in 2020 to present, a total of 6,380 families would have benefited from this program, and it cost the government $42.28 million. What the government did was they protected, in giving persons the Adopt a Family program, they protected their privacy, and persons had the opportunity to use bank cards to collect the stipend and spend it as they liked in buying and supplying to their families. Mr. President, there was a time, and I heard Senator King spoke about the call-in programs. There was a time when both in the print and electronic media and in the call-in programs, there were persons complaining of standing at bus stops and in the bus terminals for hours. We heard of school children who had to leave home very early in the morning, and they could not get back home until very late at night, sometimes after night. This is now a thing of the past. The Transport Board purchased some 49 electric buses to ease this. And these buses come with free Wi-Fi so that persons are in contact with their family and friends all around the world. These buses allow the Transport Board to reinstate several of the routes that had to be stopped because of the unavailability of buses. Mr. President, I am pleased to report that we now have a reliable bus service going to areas like Dash Valley in St. George, Chalky Monk in St. Andrew, Dark Hole in St. Joseph, Jackson, Warren Service, expansion of the ABC connection from Whole Town to the airport, and we even have a Sunday bus service going to Bath Beach in St. John. These are about a few of the routes that were reinstated as a result of the purchase of these electric buses. We now have a reliable bus service, no more long waits in the bus stands or in the bus terminals. Mr. President, the Transport Augmented Program, familiarly known as TAP, was implemented to assist former workers of the Transport Board who were retrenched to own and operate their own buses. We did not just say to them, we are implementing this program. We help them with the financing of the program so that they can own and operate their own vehicles. We now have 153 permit holders benefiting from this program implemented by a government at work. The TAP program greatly assists with the transportation and the long waits. The Ministry of Transport, Works and Water Resources, who has the responsibility for the Transport Board under subprogram 527, would be using part of the funds allocated in this estimates 2022 to 2023 to prepare for the transition to the Barbados Mass Transit Authority. Mr. President, to facilitate this transition, the automated fare collection system will be implemented and would greatly assist with the smooth operation of the Barbados Mass Transit Authority. With this implementation, we would have accurate reconciliation of revenue versus ridership and the ability to better monitor revenue leakage. It would also provide a safer operating environment. No longer would we have cash on the buses, and we all know of the criminal activity from persons robbing buses. This will be a thing of the past, and we're hoping that it will decrease because there will be no cash on board the buses. It would also have some benefits to commuters as well. Commuters no longer have to travel with cash. If you are taking a ride on a Transport Board bus today, you have to have the exact fare because they do not get back cash. We will now be able to ride on the buses. Commuters will now be able to ride on the buses and pay using their bank cards or the bus cards, which will be implemented. Or at present, they're working on an app. And all of this, Mr. President, is included in the estimates to make life easier and to make the Barbados Mass Transit transition a smooth one. We do it all over the world, and Barbados is no exception. We will do what we have to do. And it will surely make traveling for commuters easier. Mr. President, I continue with the Barbados Water Authority. Under this government, an age-old problem of water woes for the people of St. John and St. Joseph has slowly come to an end. And this was done because of the Vineyard Water Augmentation Project, which benefited the residents in these parishes. They can actually now turn their taps on and get running water. Residents no longer have to wait early in the mornings or go to the tanker when it comes out to have to lift those heavy buckets and other receptacles of water. Those of us who are familiar with the country areas are well aware of the hills that they would have to traverse in order to get the water to their homes. But it does not stop there, Mr. President. Included in these estimates for 2022 to 2023, relief will be coming for the residents of the north of the island. With the establishment of containerized desalination plants at Colleton and Hope in St. Lucie, the relocation of 2 containerized desal plants from Trent to Colleton would augment the water supply caused by extended drought conditions. We are all aware, presently, of the water woes being experienced by the residents in the north, especially in St. Lucie and St. Peter. Mr. President, the St. Stephen's and Lodge Hill upgrade project would allow the Barbados Water Authority the capacity to move water from the Ionox desalination plant into Lancaster and Apes Hill pumping stations. Customers in the area of Shop Hill, Redmonds Village, Bagatelle, and the surrounding areas would benefit from this upgrade. Like the residents living in these areas, I am indeed looking forward to the completion of these projects. Mr. President, on any given day that you are listening again to a call-in program, you would hear the Barbados Water Authority being criticized for its customer service. You would hear persons saying they have called the Barbados Water Authority to report a burst pipe 3 months ago, 4 months ago. They have not been given an answer and the pipe is still running. Well, the Barbados Water Authority, the Customer Service Department, on hearing these calls and complaints, immediately went to work. And included in these estimates in the operational budget of the Barbados Water Authority is the cost for the execution of a customer satisfaction survey. Mr. President, this survey is being done to allow the Barbados Water Authority to obtain feedback from its valued customers on their experiences and the quality of customer service being delivered while conducting business at the Barbados Water Authority, whether it is via the telephone, face-to-face, or by email. The Customer Service Satisfaction Survey would assist in identifying the areas of dissatisfaction as well as perceived strengths and weaknesses of the Barbados Water Authority, as well as to determine the preferred communication method for customers. This survey, Mr. President, is going to be divided into 3 components. It would have a main data collection component, processing the data at the end, and more importantly, analysis and reporting. Mr. President, to address the problems identified and improve the service and to come at the analysis, a trained, experienced project consultant have been retained to process the data, and provide a report on conclusion. After hearing the customer, getting feedback from the customers, the finding of this report would be taken seriously and every effort would be made to fix the problem and increase and improve on customer service. Mr. President, this clearly demonstrates that the Barbados Water Authority is taking customer service seriously. Customers can expect at the end of this survey, they can expect an improved customer service. And customers are important to any business, Mr. President, both if it's in the private or the public sector. So the Barbados Water Authority has to treat the customers with respect. I now move to the Ministry of Environment and National Beautification, and I start with the Sanitation Service Authority to say what they are doing with the programs they are doing in this year's estimates. Mr. President, driving around Barbados before May 2018, it was the norm to see garbage piling up at street corners. It was also unsightly, and it was also a hazard to our health. It attracted rodents. Mr. President, on assuming office, this government immediately went to work and added 33 new garbage trucks to a depleted fleet. These 33 trucks brought the fleet at the Sanitation Service Authority to 41. Mr. President, I know you know figures very well, and I am sure you have already done the math and calculated how many trucks this country had to service the 11 parishes. Without doing the maths, what I want to say, though, is that we did not have the complement of 35 that is needed to service the country. Mr. President, pileups around this country are no more. This is as a result of a government who immediately went to work in May 2018. Barbadians are now seeing weekly garbage pickups. And the Sanitation Service Authority is moving further to improve the pickups to twice weekly. This is already budgeted in this year's estimates to improve our garbage collection. Mr. President, yet another example of this government at work. Of note, Mr. President, all of the trucks at the Sanitation Service Authority are outfitted with bin lifters to accommodate rollout bins, which are being distributed to householders across this island. These rollout bins have been implemented as a safety measure for the employees of the Sanitation Service Authority. And I want to repeat it. These rollout bins have been implemented as a safety measure for the employees of the Sanitation Service Authority. No longer would these workers be required to lift the heavy bins we saw before we had the rollout bins, which were used by householders, onto the trucks to empty the garbage in them. Over the years, some of these workers had to be retired medically unfit from lifting the heavy bins. They either suffer from knee injuries or back injuries. These rollout bins have been implemented to address this problem and to stop the workers from having to lift the heavy bins. Mr. President, I saw on the front page of today's paper an article with someone using the bins for the purpose other than what they are intended. And I want to use this opportunity to ask Barbadians to use the rollout bins for the purpose intended. Let us show some respect and empathy for these workers and cooperate with these gentlemen and ladies who are doing a fantastic job in keeping this country clean. Use the bins for the purpose intended. Mr. President, I now move to the National Clean and Green Project. This project focuses on transforming specific public areas across this country, all in an effort at reducing and eliminating illegal dumping. Illegal dumping, Mr. President, can cause serious public health effects, as well as it damages the environment and can contribute to an increased probability of spreading diseases. Mr. President, these are areas that once had bulky waste covered in bush, and they are being debushed, and the bulky waste is being removed. The areas are landscaped and they're including trees, fruit trees, shrubs, plants, and local species of plants as well. Seating is also provided for locals and visitors using these areas. To date, 31 areas have been debushed and cleaned and are now ready for use. And I want to name some of these areas. We have Flat Rock in St. George, Ashbyland in Christchurch, Golden Rock in St. Michael, Dublin Road in St. James, Church Village in St. Philip, National Disabilities Unit in St. Michael, Oxnards in St. James, Poolwoods in St. John, Gaze in St. Peter, Friendly Hall in St. Lucie, Edge Hill Terrace, St. Thomas, Blackmans in St. Joseph, Green St. George, Arches Bay in St. Lucie. Those are a few of the 31 areas that are completed to date. And the intention is to do 60 more, and these are budgeted in this year's estimates. Mr. President, this project has increased employment opportunities for persons living in these areas. Families are benefiting. When an area is identified and work is there to be done, residents living in these areas are part of beautifying the area. So it gives them the opportunity to have not only ownership of the area, because it is their work that made the area look the way it does at the end of the project, but it is also giving them an opportunity to put food on their tables. Mr. President, it is a joy to see how some of these areas have been converted to give residents and visitors an area to sit and relax with their friends and families in an outdoor atmosphere. Mr. President, I would like to commend the ministry for this initiative, which seeks to protect our environment. Mr. President, these areas were done to protect the environment, and in commending the ministry for the work done, I would also like to appeal to persons using the areas to put the garbage in the cans provided and not throw the garbage all across the areas. It was done to stop that, so please assist the ministry with its work. I now move on to the National Botanical Gardens. Mr. President, the Ministry of Environment and National Beautification have transformed 254 acres of Zone 1 lands, an area that prior to May 2018, we all know it was unsightly. Mr. President, I have to travel through Waterford Bottom. Before 2018, that is what it was called, Waterford Bottom, and it was like traveling through a forest. But after May 2018, I have the joy of traveling through the Waterford Boulevard and to look around and see the green space. No longer do we have the bush. It is indeed a sight to see. And I am sure that the Deputy President can identify with this transformation. And I want to thank her for the part in which she played in this. With $2,751,120 budgeted for this financial year for the National Beautification Project, this money will see walking trails and public utilities being installed. Things like water, light, and toilet facilities will be installed. An amphitheater is being constructed, catering to a wide range of social, cultural, and entertainment events. Mr. President, I only highlighted a few of the things being done in this area that was once covered in bush. Mr. President, quite recently, I had the opportunity to work with the staff at the National Botanical Gardens to arrange a live streaming tree planting ceremony for the Council General of Toronto and Barbadians living in Toronto. Those trees were gifts for a parish booth competition held in Toronto in January 2020 and organized by the Council General. Mr. President, 11 booths representing each parish were beautifully decorated by Barbadians living in Toronto. The winning parish was St. Andrew. Mr. President, I am sure both you and the Deputy President are familiar with that event. The prize for the winning parish they were given the opportunity to plant trees. At the live tree planting ceremony in the National Botanical Gardens, representatives of residents living in Toronto who participated in the competition, as well as residents from St. Andrew, were in attendance at this event. During the live streaming, we were able to, technology afford us the opportunity to zoom into the botanical gardens, showing Barbadians living and following the stream the beauty of this area. Mr. President, I am happy to say that after the tree planting ceremony, I was contacted by the Council General stating that the hundreds of Barbadians who viewed the ceremony that they were extremely proud to see the transformation of the National Botanical Gardens. Some of them showed a keen interest in wanting to plant trees in the name of their families, and some of them even inquired on how they can contribute to the project. Mr. President, when I looked at the faces on the stream, I saw happy Barbadians who were smiling to see the transformation of this area being done by this government. Mr. President, presently, in driving through, and I did that up to last Sunday, as I drove through the botanical gardens, it is being used by Barbadians for exercising, picnicking, or just relaxing and spending time with family and friends. I've even seen it being used by churches to hold services. Mr. President, this is yet another instance of a caring government working to providing for its citizens. Mr. President, I now move to the Ministry of People, Empowerment, and Elder Affairs. The Welfare Department of the People, Empowerment, and Elder Affairs provides financial support to individuals and families who are in need through means testing and liaising with social workers and government agencies. With many persons unemployed, a lot of people are calling on this department at this time for assistance. This department presently receives 13,000 calls a month for assistance. Mr. President, the ratio of calls to one officer is 500, which is 10 times the national standard, which is 50 per one officer. Mr. President, at a glance, one would want to say that the demands for assistance is great. My concern, though, Mr. President, is that persons requesting services from this department are not given follow-up calls with regards to the status of their claims. Mr. President, there are persons who are in need, and in most instances have to provide for young children and have no idea where the next meal is going to come from to put on their tables. They have young children to send to school. They have to buy uniforms, bags, books for these children. And they want to hear something from this department so that they know whether or not they are getting assistance. Very often, Mr. President, these persons have to catch a bus to go to the welfare department, sometimes borrowing money from a relative or friend in the hope that when they get there, they would receive a voucher to help them to hear how soon help will be coming their, or hear how soon help will be coming their way. Mr. President, very often this is not the case, and these persons have to go back to their families empty-handed. Mr. President, I know that every opportunity is being made by this government to get some persons back to work as soon as possible, and I am confident that with the growth of the economy, that this will happen. But in the meantime, Mr. President, I am making a passionate plea that until this happens, let us show some empathy to the persons who are experiencing poverty at this time. I am asking that consideration be given to establishing a help desk with a functioning telephone, with persons answering the phone for the persons who have applied for this service. The help desk should be staffed by persons who are trained to deal with circumstances, showing empathy and communicating with them while informing them the stage of their application. Sometimes all it takes for a person who's experiencing something is to talk them through the problem until assistance comes their way. Mr. President, on July 2nd, this country was impacted by Hurricane Elsa, which caused extensive damage to homes, with some homes still uninhabitable. The Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs mobilized the departments under its ministry to provide resources for persons in need. Mr. President, this involved providing accommodation, catering, counseling, transportation, and distribution of food services to displaced families at a cost of $585,983. Mr. President, though the ministry was able to assist some people, there are still several persons without housing since Hurricane Elsa. Persons are still living under tarpaulins, they still have their roofs off, and it is not good to see or hear from these persons who are experiencing this. Mr. President, I hate to say it, but in July, these persons who had problems called the district emergency management. The problem was logged into the system, and today no contact has been made with the families. Mr. President, I am using this opportunity to make a plea to the relevant ministries to come together, peruse the database, it is there, and make contact with these persons, letting them know how soon help would be coming their way. Mr. President, I know that as a government, better can be done, and better will be done when attention is given to these persons. I now move to the Barbados Trust Loan Fund. Mr. President, this government was criticized heavily for the Barbados Trust Loans Fund, which was established on November 5th, 2018, to assist the ordinary man in the street to establish a business. The ordinary man who did not have the collateral to invest in a business, this ordinary man who was spared the rigors and demands of the commercial banks to borrow $5,000. Mr. President, this government ignored the criticism and focused on the purpose for its establishment, and that is to help ordinary men and women establish businesses. Mr. President, I am happy to report that from then, November 2018, until March 10, 2022, the Barbados Trust Funds which was funded by government to the tune of $26.5 million they were able to do 4,092 loans through the following sector disbursements: agriculture, 58, and I'm only naming a few, manufacturing, 382, retail and distribution, 1,202, services, 1,767. As a result of this, 5,706 persons were employed. It did not leave the persons borrowing out in the pasture, Mr. President. They received guidance and training from the Barbados Trust Loan Fund. A total of 2,218 of the clients of the Barbados Trust Loan Fund received entrepreneurial training. The COVID-19 pandemic prevented more persons from being trained. Mr. President, with the COVID pandemic and its restrictions, clients struggled to meet their payment commitments as the pandemic continued to create severe drag on the economic fortunes of some sectors. The Barbados Trust Loan Fund worked with them and devised a program with revised arrangements inclusive of restructuring the loans and, in some instances, diversifying certain businesses. They also did a series of training workshops and consultations with sector and capacity consultants and stakeholders. The Barbados Trust Loan Fund has been able to build the capacity of some businesses. Mr. President, it does not stop there. In 2022 to 2023, and included in these estimates, the Barbados Trust Loan Fund intend to disburse 800 loans annually at 70 loans per month, 16 training sessions annually, promote 10 businesses via social media platforms monthly, and have 20 community business-to-business events annually. Mr. President, those are just a few of the things being done by this heavily criticized department of the government as it gives the ordinary man and woman the opportunity to own and operate their businesses successfully. Mr. President, while they were talking, this government was working and continues to work for the people of this country. Mr. President, as I close, in supporting this bill before this honorable chamber, and to say that, I just want to say that despite the COVID-19 pandemic, the ash fall, the freak storm, Hurricane Elsa, this government, led by Prime Minister the Honorable Mia Amor Motley, must be commended for the hard work and good work it is doing to provide a better life for the people of this, our fair land. Mr. President, I am obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator Paris. Senator Harewood.
Mr. President, it is a great honor to speak for the first time in this House and on this appropriation bill. And I want to offer my support to the ongoing efforts of the government of Barbados. I want to begin by thanking members of this august chamber for the warm embrace that I would have received from all sides of the chamber. And I also want to extend a token of appreciation to the staff of the Parliament of Barbados who work assiduously, along with the members of the police service, and who collectively really define the character of this august chamber as well. I also want to thank the Prime Minister for providing me with this opportunity through appointment to be of greater service to the country, and without any level of arrogance intended, Mr. President, I say that I promise to the people of Barbados that I will not disappoint. Today, Mr. President, I rise to reiterate important aspects of commitment on the part of the government while offering a perspective on matters of interest in the areas of agriculture and to some lesser extent in the area of energy. Two separate, distinctive areas, but very well interconnected within the grand scheme of things. But before I proceed, let me apply some context and make a related diversion so that those members of the Chamber and also the general public of Barbados are not necessarily misled by any prior statements that refer to the fiscal deficit of Barbados. Indeed, Mr. President, if I am allowed to draw an analogy, if I were privy to an income of $2,000 and subject to expenditure from that same income within the same period of $2,500, it leaves me with a personal deficit of $500, from which I now have to seek perhaps a loan to suffice the deficit. That $500 represents 25% of the $2,000. If in the following period my salary increased, my income increased to $2,500, while the expenditure increased as well to $2,700, that leaves me with a personal income, a personal deficit of $200, now representing only 8% of my income. To the same token, Mr. President, we heard earlier about this enormous, exorbitant fiscal deficit, that we have of $867 million, which represents 30% of the revenues that we have estimated for 2022 in these estimates. Interestingly enough, last year, that deficit was $869 million, representing 33% of the revenue from the previous period. If I were to venture further back, Mr. President, it would have been $1.18 billion in terms of the deficit back in 2016, representing 40% of the revenue for that particular year. And we've moved from 40% in 2016, we've bypassed 33% in the last fiscal period, and we are now at 30% of revenue for this particular period, Mr. President. And I want the public to know that it is not always the size of debt. We've heard this a number of times, but it's your ability to service the debt. And from that progression from 40% to 30%, I say the $867 million in the fiscal deficit that has been reported in these estimates is way more manageable than last year, the year before last year, and as far back as 2016, Mr. President, sorry. So I just want to state that we also heard, Mr. President, about the burden of the state-owned enterprises. And I run a similar line of analysis in terms of the trends. In these estimates, the transfers are $673 million. In 2021, the transfers were $675 million. So these estimates represent a reduction of 13%. And in 2020, the transfers were $787 million. And while we understand and appreciate the calls for better accountability or management or understanding as to why the transfers are that high, I want also for the public to understand that we are progressing to the direction of reducing the transfers, at the same time increasing the efficiency and the effectiveness of the state-owned enterprises to handle their own affairs. And the trends are also positive there, Mr. President. Mr. President, I also want to say that I am wholeheartedly in support of the stewardship of the government in terms of the management of the economy. The government has managed this economy through turbulent economic growth periods caused by exogenous developments on the international market. It has managed the economy through challenging periods caused by natural disasters which will increasingly threaten our very existence as a small island developing state. And I believe, Mr. President, that some members of this august chamber and perhaps some members of the public may feel slighted if I did not also say that we managed to subsist, albeit on autopilot, through the most glorious of periods as well. Mr. President, I will proceed with the meat of the matter in terms of my presentation on agriculture and energy. No matter how much oil and gas a country can produce and sell, no matter the depth of financial resources it has to exploit, and no matter the military might it has at its disposal at any given time, no country on this earth can sustain its advancement without effectively addressing food security as a core necessity for its progression. And likewise, said in another way, none can afford to neglect either the quantitative or qualitative needs of its population as it relates to food and nutrient supplies. Now, our geographical location in the Western Atlantic places us squarely within what is referred to as the hurricane belt. Our general topography as a relatively flat island means that we have limited protection from natural disasters. And the reality of our economic status as a small island developing state means that we are essentially, as some may say, sitting ducks in the grand scheme of things related to climate change. And regardless of how many persons humor themselves and others with proclamations and pronouncements of God being a Bajan whenever a system bypasses us, the reality, Mr. President, is that Barbados is extremely, extremely vulnerable. It is against this backdrop, Mr. President, that I lend my support to the work plan presented by the Ministry of Agriculture and the associated state-owned enterprises under which it assists and serves as well. And these enterprises are tasked with the arduous but important obligation of bolstering our food security in Barbados and identifying both internal and external markets for expansion. Similar to all other sectors over the last 2 years, Mr. President, our agricultural sector faced the onslaught of COVID-19, which caused major supply challenges, not only here in Barbados, not only within our region, but also all over the world. But for us, it exposed another layer of vulnerability that we need to address within the region. Added to the already existing limitations posed by water scarcity, climate change, soil fertility, and land regeneration issues, increasing demand for alternative uses of land, both commercial and residential purposes, and the limited uptake of the most modern technologies. Adding to all of that, Mr. President, the COVID-19 pandemic truly became the most bitter ingredient in a recipe destined to cripple anything to do with agriculture. However, as bad as the impact of the pandemic was, and it certainly was bad, it presented some timely reminders of opportunities for us as a country and as a region, respectively. So high was our dependence on extra-regional imports for food that when COVID took a toll on the international supply chain, it caused noticeable levels of distress in the region. This anxiety led to the reaffirmation of CARICOM's initiative called 25 in 5, where the heads of the various agricultural ministries got together and agreed on a goal to reduce our food import bill by 25% by 2025. Within the context of Barbados, we recognize this to be very important, given the recent trends in our food import bill as well, which increased by some 7% from $664 million to now roughly $709 million. It is a situation that is a matter of urgency and one that we must arrest as a matter of urgency as well. That being the case, Mr. President, I believe that the initiatives announced by the government have great potential of getting us to that target of 25% by 2025, if, and only if, we can ensure that the implementation of the activities is pursued with the same level and degree of alacrity as the policies have been presented. And what has the government's response been, Mr. President? Strengthening regional cooperation, of course, expanding local production, eliminating barriers for broader participation of existing and new farmers, and bringing our support services up to international standards. In terms of regional cooperation, Mr. President, I have long held the view, as a gentleman who loves engaging in agricultural activities, and I still hold the view that the key to food security in Barbados and many other Caribbean countries lies in our ability to expand avenues of collaboration across the region. I am therefore pleased, Mr. President, to see us going a step further than the usual token narrative of brotherly and sisterly embrace across the region, and to recognize that we are moving towards more functional cooperation as far as the collaboration across the region is concerned. In essence, food security is not only about producing as much as you can with respect to the varieties and quantities of produce in a country, but it's really about having that alternative intake from other jurisdictions relatively close by that you can depend on as well, particularly through very difficult times as we are facing now and that we faced recently as well. I am therefore delighted by the procurement of 25 shade houses, which will add significant protection to many farmers against the ravages of overexposure to the elements. Equally as well, I am delighted by the gifting of a further 25 shade houses by the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. This is not a matter of political aesthetics at all, Mr. President. Where many may see shade houses as just wood, just netting, just metal, sometimes glass, depending on if you have some PV attached to it, what I really see in this gifting and procurement is building resilience. Building resilience. If we understand this, we would understand that where the excessive exposure exists to the elements, it can lead to lower yields of various food crops, further resulting in shortages and triggering the need to import and meet that demand shortage. With the shade house technology, producers now have the ability to mitigate that food shortage and also have the ability to also mitigate the unnecessary outflows of foreign exchange that is associated with imports of food as well. That is resilience, Mr. President. Mr. President, I look forward to the other aspects of functional cooperation, seeking to strengthen our relationship between Barbados and Guyana. Among them are initiatives on increasing food production, removing the barriers to trade, the possibility of a Barbados-Guyana food terminal, as has been pronounced by the Prime Minister in the budget, and also transportation, logistics, and efficiency for agro-processing facilities. These are all fundamental. But out of all of these initiatives, the one that gives me the greatest level of appreciation to acknowledge is the Guyana-Barbados Food Sustainability Plan. And I will say it again because it is very important, the Barbados-Guyana Food Sustainability Plan. Two countries, separate agricultural potential, but a common goal to ensure each other's coexistence through joint programming in both countries, and this is a significant step, Mr. President. Mr. President, this collaboration between Guyana and Barbados started many years ago, but whereas some may think that it may be a knee-jerk reaction now, I would remind all members of the House and those within the listening ear as well that this is actually part and parcel of a much larger process in terms of the CARICOM integration project. In fact, when we look at Article 57 of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, titled Implementation of the Common Agricultural Policy, Section 1, Subsection C, speaks to the establishment of linkages among member states with complementary natural resources, industries, agricultural skills, and technical skills. And you could not have a better representation than what is currently happening between Barbados and Guyana in terms of bolstering that aspect of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. On the local scene, the government has been pressing on with useful initiatives to expand both the land area and the participants dedicated to the agricultural sector. We can name a number of them now, Mr. President, and there are so many to list here, but I will try to be as concise as possible. We know about the feed program, within which 552 persons have successfully completed feed training to date, and that represents roughly 45% or so of those who applied to the program, or just about 1,200 applicants to give a number to it. In recognition that not all of the land available to the BADMC is suitable to facilitate the agricultural activity that it would like, the government has also sought to engage the private sector to make lands available for some of the shortfall. And this in particular refers to the partnership at Lears, where we're going to see 100 acres dedicated to 150 farmers to do both animal and crop cultivation as well. As far as preparing Barbados and Barbadian farmers for the external markets, I am pleased to see that there is advancement on the sanitary and phytosanitary legislation and the establishment of a single agency for the National Agricultural Health and Food Control Program. Mr. President, we cannot engage in terms of the export of our products outside of the region to any competitive scale if we do not have the sanitary and phytosanitary provisions in place to ensure that how our foods are produced are in line with international standards, Mr. President. This is a very important step. I also want to state, as a gentleman who is very much interested in reggae, that I listened to a song by Anthony B. recently, which says, nobody wants to plant the corn, but everybody wants to rear the barn. And against that backdrop, I am happy to see that there is also advancement on the pre-deal larceny legislation and also advancement on the establishment of a pre-deal larceny unit. And the first time I saw this, Mr. President, was 7 years ago in Grenada, and they literally have the trucks marked pre-deal larceny unit. And they literally have schedules 24 hours around the clock where they go through different farming establishments to ensure that, that the operations and the persons who are conducting operations have the permission to be on those particular lots as well. And within the context of Grenada, what I would also mention is that they're very selective in terms of those officers of the pre-deal larceny unit. Suffice it to say that those officers are from the particular agricultural jurisdictions, so they know the farmers, they know the workers, and if someone is on the lot that they don't know, they're more inclined to ask a question. And that is a protective layer that was added in terms of pre-deal larceny. I want to say, Mr. President, I want to reiterate, Mr. President, that food security in Barbados now and going forward, and in order to be sustainable, has to have an interdependent infrastructure that focuses on collaboration across the region and not necessarily focusing solely on how much we can produce internally. I say that because also, when we think about it in terms of investing, and those who have some financial knowledge about investing, they know that diversification is really the key, one of the key pillars to investment. So if you are interested in investing in bonds, you may put 50% of what you have in bonds, another 20% in equity, and another 25% or so in different instruments. To a similar token, if we were to view the investment in agriculture similar to how you invest in the financial market, we may have a substantial investment here in Barbados, and we may also have substantial investments by way of partnerships in Guyana to ensure that any disruptions here can be offset by the investments we have in Guyana. And don't think that is a one-way street. Many persons may not know, and I'm happy to let them know, that one of the largest rice paddy producers in Guyana is a Barbadian, sitting on some 30,000 acres of land. A very distinguished Barbadian as well, who I'm not inclined to call the name, but I suspect some persons may know. We have been taking advantage of these opportunities in the past, Mr. President, and we should continue to take advantage of these opportunities in recognition that Guyana and other Caribbean territories have the ability to absorb any exogenous shocks and risks that we may face now and in the future as well. And I am inclined also to take this opportunity to thank the local farmers and also those farmers who are non-nationals that would have provided for us throughout the ashfall, that would have provided for us throughout this entire COVID pandemic, because had they not been committed to the agricultural sector, Mr. President, we may not have been able to provide for our people or our frontline workers as much as we think we ought to have. I also want to make comment on a comment that was made earlier in terms of the fishing industry. Mr. President, I am proud to say that I am a product of the fishing industry. I am absolutely proud to say so. I take every opportunity to say so. My mother works in the fish market, and I am happy for the experience I've had and the knowledge that she's transferred to me of the fishing industry. I want to acknowledge that I understand the points made earlier in terms of the increases in terms of diesel and how it may affect the prices of fish in the fish market. However, that sounds good in theory, but that is not the reality of what affects the fish prices in the market. It is really a matter of supply. And I want to urge the various ministries, if it is not slated now, please slate it in the near future. We need to conduct a study as far as the depletion of our fish stock is concerned, and they need to do it as a matter of urgency, Mr. President. Mr. President, I say that against the backdrop that I understand also all too well and directly how these livelihoods can be placed at significant risk. And I support any call and any measure to add value and to add any safety net to those members of the fishing industry any day of my life. And I want to support any call from that to that extent. Mr. President, one other area I want to speak on this afternoon is energy. As it relates to energy, I am also satisfied that the pronouncements and the estimates made fair representation of the circumstances we face today within the context of the international developments happening, particularly in Eastern Europe. Today, as we speak, Mr. President, on the international market, the price of a barrel of Brent crude hovers around $109. Whereas this same time last year, this same day last year, it was just about $63 a barrel. Now, Barbados is not a member of OPEC for understandable reasons. We can't refine the oil we extract here, and therefore we are dependent on the imports of refined products as it stands today from Jamaica and also Suriname. And those countries are also experiencing some issues in terms of the volatility of prices over there as well. And one would think naturally that if our suppliers are experiencing volatility in their prices, that we would also experience the same as we purchase. So, Mr. President, we must be fair in our understanding of what the wiggle room is that we really have in the determination of the prices of refined product on the local and international market. And fair in terms of the understanding of why we need an energy revolution and energy transition within our country. That said, Mr. President, I am in full support of the ambitious drive to ensure that hundreds of Barbadian homeowners are equipped with solar PV systems in an expedited manner. I wholeheartedly support it. And this is to ensure that they too can benefit from the transition while adding value and adding revenue to their pockets as well. Mr. President, many persons may not be able to relate to having the ability to go and spend $5,000 and $10,000 and $15,000 on a solar PV system on their rooftops, particularly not the most vulnerable. And that is why the pronouncement by the Prime Minister in terms of establishing the right to access renewable energy on the rooftops of Barbados, to me, is a fundamental game changer. And Mr. President, I can reference other rights: the right to equality, the right to freedom of discrimination, the right to peaceful assembly of association, and I would want to posit that the right to access renewable energy is very, very well within its own and holding along those other rights as well. And the government has laid out multiple other options. For those persons who may not be able to invest in solar PVs, they may also be able to invest in green energy bonds. They may be able to invest in green energy projects as well by way of equity. And at the end of the day, get a higher return than the less than 1% that they would get if they had to put those funds in the commercial banks. and the commercial banks have their purpose as well. Let me also add that. This is no gimmick at all, Mr. President. This is no gimmick in terms of the returns that are possible in our solar energy, our renewable energy sector. And the reason why it is possible and why people can speak with pellucid clarity with respect to the returns has to do with the feed-in tariff, a stabilized mechanism through which any business person can then calculate his or her internal rate of return, return on investment, and any other metric. That feed-in tariff, Mr. President, is a very crucial part of our renewable energy sector. I also want to make mention to a comment earlier in terms of the vehicle-to-grid framework. From my understanding, my most recent understanding, a study was conducted, and the results of that study have been submitted to Cabinet. And I believe what I was informed of is that the next step is for Cabinet to then kind of relay those findings to the Fair Trading Commission, and that will help them advance their vehicle-to-grid determination of the rates as well. So I also want to mention that we are progressing on that front. Now, Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, I want to lend my support to the government on both agriculture and energy. I want to say that the measures that I have heard are significant game-changing measures, and I want to commend the Prime Minister for her approach in ensuring that at least 50% of the investment in any major projects with respect to renewable energy in Barbados has to be localized. I refer to the renewable energy licensing regime, which is a recent study done by the Ministry of Energy, which showcased, Mr. President, that over 67 million pounds of interest, and this study was done in the UK, 67 million pounds of interested investors are really out there ready, willing, and able to come into the Barbados market. And imagine if that is only the UK, imagine the rest of Europe that recognize that our feed-in tariff offers them an opportunity that they cannot get in the UK, that they cannot get in other countries like Germany. And it was mentioned earlier as well, it was mentioned earlier that countries like Germany may seem advanced in renewable energy, but we in Barbados have X amount of exposure. Mr. President, the understanding is that it is not the exposure to renewable energy that really has the savings and causes the efficiencies, but it rests in storage. Storage is the bridge behind all of this. So we can generate as much energy throughout the entire day, but when the night comes and you don't have storage to utilize some of the excesses, then you can't really be making much money off of it. And that is where Germany and that is where Europe has the advantage. And that is why I also support the Prime Minister in terms of her acknowledgement of having some generators, having the duties reduced on the imports of some generators. I would add that if those generators, one second, Mr. President. I would add, Mr. President, that we know generators run off of gas and diesel as well. But if those generators also run off of electricity, then the technology is there to allow for you to capture some of that solar PV, run it to the generator throughout the day, and allow the generator to run parts of the household at night as well, saving you some money as well. Sorry. Mr. President, I want to conclude by saying I am in full support of the measures in these estimates. I recognize that no government is perfect, but within the last 10 years of observation and participation, this is as near to reflective of our current situation as can be. And with those few words, Mr. President, I want to support the government and I want to support their initiatives in agriculture and energy. I'm obliged, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Harewood. Senator Cummins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would wish to move a motion that we suspend tonight's session until Monday morning at 10 a.m. That would be Monday the 21st, Mr. President, at 10 a.m.
Thank you. The question is that this sitting be suspended until Monday, the 21st of March at 10 o'clock in the morning. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. The sitting therefore stands so suspended. Remember, there's no leeway and latitude for start. We need to have a quorum to get running at 10 o'clock. Sitting stands suspended.